Hello, welcome to Roy's Book Reviews. Today I would like to discuss my thoughts on the novel Z, a novel of Zelda Fitzgerald. Most of you listening to this probably know that Zelda Fitzgerald was the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and that is largely how history um, knows her and thinks of her, but in fact, she was a formidable, talented person in her own right. And this book gives us her story in fictional form, but it is clearly very well researched. And many of the pages in this book, you can tell, are just taken straight out of the real lives of the Fitzgeralds and the people in their inner circle. And of course, Therese and Fowler was not there, so she had to take some liberties and use her imagination. But my guess is that she comes pretty close to the truth for the most part. So I'm going to read from the words in my review at Goodreads here for a bit. Z, a novel of Zelda Fitzgerald, is a fine piece of literary historical fiction. I've always been fascinated by the Jazz Age and the artists who gave it its reputation, especially the American writers who took a break from our shores to live in Paris and join the future icons from Europe in wine, cheese, and debauchery. Therese Ann Fowler does an exemplary job of bringing familiar names and reputations from literary anthologies to life, skillfully transporting us to romanticized days. Reading this novel, I felt very much like Owen Wilson's character in Woody Allen's movie Midnight in Paris. It's one of my favorite Woody Allen movies, one of my favorite movies, period. And like the Owen Wilson character, readers are suddenly thrust into a world where each day was filled to the brim with an excess of genius, celebration, and elegant style. And in the middle of this story, we find Zelda Fitzgerald, a woman who, on the one hand, was perfectly emblematic of this time. We think of the Jazz Age, we think of the flapper party girls in their short dresses and short hairstyles, dancing up on tables, the life of the party, drinking to excess, just having a grand old time, seemingly without a care in the world. And on the surface, Zelda Fitzgerald definitely does her part to live out that role and to give that appearance to the outside world. But in spite of this, even though she seemed to be your standard party girl, eye candy on the arm of a literary great who was the brains and the talent of the operation. The truth is that Zelda was a woman who could not fit in the way she truly yearned to into her society because she was a woman, a wife, a mother, living in a man's world. Zelda was a person bursting with talent and ambition that could not be fully exploited and showcased because of her public role and private role as Mrs. Fitzgerald. Fowler explores the great passion that brought and somehow held the Fitzgeralds together over the course of their tempestuous marriage. The reader knows before even turning to the first page of this book that greatness is in store for them, most especially for F. Scott, but Zelda is more of a mystery to us. As the pages are turned and the narrative unfolds, we learn that there is more to Zelda than her reputation as a rather unstable temptress. We watch her try to be a good wife, as the time period defined this term, to the man she loved, while also trying to be a woman ahead of her time who hoped to carve out her own place in the history books. We watch her desires nearly destroy her as her husband's vices wreak havoc on their roller coaster marriage and on his health. There are various famous names who flit in and out of their lives. Ernest Hemingway plays a major role in expanding F. Scott Fitzgerald's insecurities and in loosening the bonds of his devotion to Zelda. F. Scott Fitzgerald is portrayed as a very insecure person who wants to be, considered not just a successful, popular, best-selling author of books such as The Great Gatsby, obviously, amongst others, but also a literary giant, a type of author, excuse me, who wins awards and gets critical rave reviews. Basically, type of author like Ernest Hemingway was, and F. Scott Fitzgerald feels that he is coming up a bit short in that category. So he considers Hemingway a mentor to him, and he hopes, that basically Hemingway's reputation and style, maybe not necessarily a style of writing, but it's just style of being, will rub off on him. But in the course of this, it basically alienates him from Zelda because F. Scott has to choose in ways between Hemingway and Zelda, and more often than he should, he chooses Hemingway. So, as was I saying, there is plenty of glamour and globetrotting and name dropping. And there's a great war and eventually another one that takes place throughout the course of the narrative. So it's definitely a very eventful time in history that the course of this novel goes over. In the center of the story is a fun-loving Southern belle who decides to take a chance on a cocky Northern soldier that her daddy does not approve of. And she chooses to defy conventions and expectations and tries to discover herself along the way rather than merely accepting who society says she is supposed to be. And F. Scott Fitzgerald casts a great shadow over her and over her efforts to establish herself in her own right as a writer, as a dancer. Seeking Light nearly destroyed Zelda, but she was a formidable woman who could withstand everything but the literal flames that consumed her on her final day. With able assistance from Therese and Fowler, Zelda has risen from the ashes and assumed her place as an icon from magical time. I was greatly enamored of this book. Like I said, I have a great deal of interest in the time period and the figures from America as well as abroad who defined this period in time with their brass style and joie de vivre and their immense talents at a time when talent is something that was actually appreciated. And back then, if you were, an author, a celebrated author, you truly were the toast of the town. In the way that today, it's not so much the case. Today, we mostly glorify pop singers and Hollywood actors and people like that, and reality TV stars get the term. But writers, for the most part, you have some of the top names who I guess you consider celebrities because they have such huge readerships. But even though they're very well known, they don't receive the level of adulation that LeBron James or Beyonce are going to receive when they, walk into a room because everybody wants to be them or wants to be with them. I mean, but back then, writers like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway and others, truly were megastars. And Zelda, deserved to be in their ranks. But because she was a woman in a man's world, she was not able to achieve um, the greatness, the recognition of greatness that perhaps she deserved. But nevertheless, she was a fascinating woman, and this book really shows us that she was not merely the woman on the side, but she was a great talent in her own right, who we perhaps should spend a little bit more time getting to know. So that is it for the latest review here at Roy's Book Reviews. I hope you found it interesting and informative. And I will be back in another week with my review of another book that I've read and perhaps enjoyed, perhaps not. You will find out.